Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Ahinoam. She was the second or third wife of David. Don't really know which one. Either she was before or after Abigail. They were kind of around the same time. So they were both wives to David while he was running in the wilderness trying to not be killed by Saul. So imagine experiencing that. You're living in caves sometimes, you're living out in fields, you have in your company all these other men and their families, and these men were known to be debtors and discontents who didn't like Saul's kingdom, so they were banding around David. This is an interesting group of people, and that's who they were moving with and living around. So in this time period, they are waiting for God's promise to be answered. He had promised David that he would be the king, right? But he's been anointed, not reigning as king yet. And so that promise has not yet been fulfilled. And this is a difficult thing for Ahinoam. She really starts to doubt if that's actually going to happen. And when she starts to doubt is when they have a real loss in their community. David is so tired of running from Saul that he goes into enemy territory to live for a while, into the Philistine territory. Now remember, Goliath was a Philistine. All the other battles he had been fighting were against the Philistines. So he goes into their territory and ends up getting favor with the king. And the king gives him a whole area to settle in called Ziklag. So that's where they live until David and his men leave to go fight a battle with the Philistines against Israel. So that sounds confusing, right? While David was in enemy territory, he was going on all these raids, and he was basically killing Israel's enemies, but then he would tell the king of the Philistine king that he was, kind of killing that guy's enemies. So there might have been some deceit going on. Anyway, he goes to fight alongside with the Philistines. We're not really sure, at least I don't really know what his agenda was in doing that, but the Philistines are not pleased. They're like, wait, this David guy, he's the one who was killing us. Like, we don't want him. Tell him to go home. So he does go home. But in that space of time when he was away from Ziklag with his men, the Amalekites, this raiding band, came through and they attacked Ziklag. And they took Abigail captive, they took Ahinoam captive, all the women, all the kids, and they looted everything. So, and they burned it. So the men get back and everything is gone and destroyed, and they want to kill David. They almost do. But then David inquires of God, and God says, hey, if you go after them, I will deliver you and you'll rescue them. So, of course, we know David does rescue them, but we see Ahinoam for the first time while she's taken captive, and she is going through all these doubts. Chances are she and Abigail were probably raped. This is a really violent society they lived in. So I don't know what they went through. It was probably bad. And they would be wondering, are we going to be slaves the rest of our lives? What's going to happen to us? It would have been terrifying. And then fortunately, David does rescue them. But you see her wrestling with those doubts during that time. And then later on in her life, she does bear David a son, Amnon. And so if you've already watched the video about Tamar, then you know who he is. If you haven't yet, then go watch that one. And I'll give you a sneak peek. Amnon doesn't end up being a great guy, really not. He falls in love with his half-sister Tamar and rapes her. And then he gets killed by his half-brother. So this would have been heartbreaking for Ahinoam. He was her only hope to have someone be on the throne, to have her blood, kind of continue on. In those days, a woman's hope was in her children and in having kids. So she just loses everything, and you see her really falling into despair. She does not see God's hope or God's promises in the play. Now, in real life, maybe she did. I don't know. But I set her up in the play to not so that we can see a contrast between her and the characters who really do grab on with faith. So you'll see that more in the show, but I think I'll leave it at that. If you want to read more about her, here's where you can go. Let me get out my handy dandy cheat sheet. Can't even talk today. All right. 1 Samuel 25 and 27 and 30. And then again in 2 Samuel 2 and 3. And then she's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 3. And that's where you just, hear about who she gave birth to. So anyway, with Ahinoam, a couple questions to consider. What hard things have you been through? Some of you guys may have endured abuse already. If and I'm talking mainly to the young ones among you, but I know we're going to have other women with us as well, and we've all been through a lot of different things. And abuse still happens. Slavery still happens. Sex slavery still happens, and it's hard to imagine, if you haven't been through that, what it would be like. The feeling of being trapped, of being enslaved, of not knowing what's going to happen to you. And yet God sees even those things. So if you have any wounds, if you've been a victim of anything like that in your past, my encouragement to you would be to not be like Ahinoam and throw aside faith and have a victim mentality, but to really wrestle with the promises that God has given us and choose to believe them, and to study out God's nature, and trust His love for us, even though sometimes it's very difficult to see. So yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it with Ahinoam. There's a lot more to talk about there, but if you have any responses, by the way, I haven't said this in the other videos, but if you want to write anything down below or comment, feel free to do that. Bye, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.